Okay, I'm going to try to get through the rest of everything right now. So, the next thing was the listed is the player class. So, right, so all that the player has is its score, its lives, its wave, extra life counter, and a mushroom field data. So once again, I explained this earlier, but mushroom field data is just the array that is the marker. It doesn't have any mushrooms in it. It's just the marker, hey, is there mushrooms here or not? And then you can load that in and out. Pretty self-explanatory. All of these functions are just to get and set everything, because I realized that a lot of people needed to do that. What else is interesting? The only other thing about it was the extra life counter, which basically I just wanted to, like, each player needs to know how far along they are in that counting, have they gotten close to that benchmark yet? And I think each player needs their own separate counter to do that. So it's basically just that is being updated when you, in the score manager, when you process the scores. When you process the scores, you're just adding to the extra life counter. Oh, sorry, it's actually in the add. You add that to the extra life counter, and then when you process and you say, oh, hey, have you reached that benchmark, the extra life threshold, then you make the little sound, you add one to the lives, make sure the HUD draws that new lives, and then you set that extra life counter back to 0. So that's all that does. I think that explains the player class pretty well. So the text display, flyweight pattern. So let us do that. So all of my HUD information is under HUD manager right here, and HUD classes for glyphs. So how to go about doing this? Awesome font. Most of the setup was given. So we have the awesome font that gets the right cell character to index. Glyphs are not game objects. They just have an index on the sprite sheet. And when you draw them, you're just drawing that part of the sprite sheet, right? That's the flyweight pattern. The glyph factories are when you create a glyph, you just get a glyph from the object pool and you initialize it based on that index. And then when you recycle a glyph, you just return it. So this way you can reuse glyphs without, creating a ton of news. You can just recycle them. And here is the look at the object pool really quick. It's like all the other object pools we've done. And then the sprite sheet obviously is right here. The font is a child of it. This is just what's normal. This is how you get the glyph is you're creating from the glyph factory instead of returning a new, commented it out, and I actually use the factory right here. So how does actually, I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit on the HUD. So the HUD has a ton of different sprite strings right here. So for instance, play one score, high score top, etc. When you, at the very beginning of the game, initialize the HUD manager, you create all of this stuff. So, create all HUD elements. And then when you create all HUD elements, you create the score. You would create everything right at the beginning. So let's see, if you just go into create P1 score, you figure out where it needs to be. And then you create a new sprite string with this justification mode, and where it is, and you give it a pointer to the font and everything. So justification mode is something I think is kind of cool that I did. It's a strategy pattern, once again, but based on whether the text should be centered around the origin, to the right of the origin, or to the left. How text justification works. So basically, if I create the player score is right justified because it's kind of 6 spaces in, and it needs to kind of hug that area. So if I go into the sprite string and create it, when I set the glyph list, that all sprite strings have that functionality where you set the glyph list. So basically a sprite string holds a list of glyphs. And then when you draw the sprite string, you just draw all of them. When you want to set that glyph list, first you need to clear it. So you go through and you recycle all of the glyphs in there, and then you create the new ones. But how you create it depends on the justification. So if you are right justified, then you do kind of this math to say, hey, I'm gonna, where should I position these cells so that the right justification, they're in the right position. And here's kind of the math that I did to figure that out. But then that's different than center. Like for center, it's a little bit more complicated because I kind of place the one in the middle, and then I place all of the ones to the left and place all of the ones to the right. And then, left is different as well. So that's kind of some kind of fine tuning you can do, I guess, with the sprite strings. That makes them a little bit easier to manage. So in the HUD manager, you just create all of these at the beginning. You don't actually set them to anything, you've just created them. And then you do that with like literally everything. When you create the attractor elements, you're creating the high score label, the copyright label, the high score entries. So the entries you're just looping through. The score manager, I actually don't have a separate high score manager. I use the score manager to have the high score entry list. So high score entry is, it has a score and a string, and that's it. The score manager has a list of these. So it has the high score entry list. In the HUD manager, you're going to loop through the high score entry list, and you can create a new sprite string associated with all of those, and you go ahead and set the glyph list to the associated high score entry name and score. Right, and then how the high score entry works really quickly in the score manager, I might as well do this now. If the player, this is at the bottom of the process scores. If it's higher than a high score, then you are going to set the high score top. Then when you update the high score list, so basically when you change back to the attractor mode, you call in the game manager, you call, hey, score manager, I'm going to update the high score list. So what you do is you push back the player manager's score, and I just give it that name new, although you're supposed to enter in the name. But you just push that into the list, and then you sort that list, which I defined. Not there. I overloaded the sorting operator. I actually did it backwards because I want the list to be backwards with the biggest at the front. And so you push the player score into the list, even if it sucked, then you sort it, and then whichever one is in the back of the list, you pop that off. So if the player didn't manage to reach the top 8 high scores, then they just get popped off immediately, or whichever one was the lowest, it gets popped off. And then you update the high score entries in the HUD, which is you loop through and you go ahead and reset the glyph list to the high score entry list of the score manager. Hopefully that makes sense for high score. I don't know how I got on that tangent, because we were talking about flyweight pattern and sprite strings. Back to the HUD manager, just at the beginning of the game. You create all of this stuff, and then basically you have these functions where you can set each of them. So you can set P1 score, set P1 lives. For setting P1 lives, right before you set everything, you clear the glyph list first. So once again, that doesn't destroy anything, that just recycles all of the glyphs in there. And then you can set the glyph list, whatever. I have this fun thing for the lives where you convert n lives to a symbol string. So basically, if I said, hey, my player has 3 lives left, what that means on the HUD is I need 2 little blaster icons. So I subtract 1. I basically count and I create a string of these little star characters. And then I'm going to set the glyph list to the star characters, and I had to add in awesome fonts. This last case, if it's a star character, that means to use the player sprite, and that's cell index 43 on the image. So I think that demonstrates the flyweight pattern pretty well, and a bit about my HUD manager. Moving on to sound manager, I already demonstrated my silent and muted, or my muted and on. I demonstrated the command pattern, and the strategies are only created once. I guess really quickly, I will show, like for instance, let's say the spider comes onto screen. Once again, the spider factory is given a pointer to the command, so then when I create the spider, I can just give it a pointer. Then when it is spawns, sorry, it's actually, I actually don't give the spider a pointer. I just, because only the factory needs it. Spider factory. So just the factory needs it, and I only start playing the sound if this is empty, or sorry, if it's empty, then I'm gonna send that sound to the manager, and if it's empty when I recycle the spider, then that means there's no more spiders on the screen, and I'm gonna stop that sound. So that's the example of a looping sound. For the sounds that only play once, you don't have to stop them ever, you just play them once. Yes. Yeah, I think that's sufficient for sound. So I think I demonstrated how the critters report the score changes. The factories are the ones that are holding those instances to the commands, and then they're just giving it to the critters. So I have the commands. Also, how the commands are deleted is they're actually deleted in the factories. So I create the command in the score manager, but then I give them to, like, for the flea, I give the flea the reference to the flea sound or whatever, and then when the flea factory terminates, that's where I'm going to delete the score and the sound. So all of the factories that are given those sounds or those scores, they delete them. The one leak that I had, if you remember, well, this happened because of the the wave data. That's why there are so many leaks here. But the one leak I had earlier was just the score, the sound for the extra lives. I couldn't figure out where to delete that, where it wouldn't mess everything up. So that was just the one leak that I had earlier. I just couldn't get around to figuring out where to delete that because I didn't give it to a factory ever, so I had trouble deleting it. But anyways, blah, blah, blah. Display of the score should manage the text. Right, so the text is only updated when the score changes once again. So in the score manager, when you process the scores, you're going to set the player score to that new score. Right. And I think I also went over how the high score works as well. Basically, the score manager has that list, and the HUD manager is updated when you switch back to attractor mode. I think that just about covers it for everything. I'm trying to look through and see if there's anything large that I missed. No. The only other thing was coding practices. It does compile without any warnings. Well, the only warnings are guess I have to rebuild. The only warnings are the like ones that are in teal or whatever, about the enum classes. Yeah. The other stuff I try to do as much as possible with public and private things. I also finally understand forward declaration, I think. For a lot of this stuff, I use that. So, like, the score manager has to have pointers to all of this stuff, but I don't need to include it here. I just know that these are going to be pointers. So I just forward declare them there and use them, and then in the actual body is where I have to include them all. So there's tons of includes in here. Right. Man, sorry, I'm kind of dragging on here. I'm just want to double check that there's nothing that I missed. So once again, just the flow of the game, the flow of it. Game manager is basically the big dog in charge of everyone, and he creates all of this stuff, creates player manager, energy manager, blah, blah, blah. And then we initialize everything. The entity manager is the one who creates the spawners, etc., etc. I had to do a couple weird pass-throughs where, like, I gave the game manager a grid manager accessor. So, like for instance, like the flea needs a reference to the grid spawner, or the grid manager, so that it can drop mushrooms appropriately. And it was easier to just have the game manager kind of have a pass through to give the flea like a pointer to that. So I did do some stuff like that. That isn't the cleanest, but it works okay. So yeah, once again, I am really dragging on here. I'm sorry. But there were some issues during gameplay, but hopefully it works well enough. Yeah, I think I demonstrated everything that I want to demonstrate. And yeah. Okay. I think I'm gonna I think I will stop. I'm sorry that this is super long. And oh yeah, once again, this is the only leak that I had. It was just that one command sound. The error list, there are a couple more that I guess I didn't catch. So there are these 3 uninitialized things, and the player controller, and the player manager, I mean. So yeah, those are the only warnings. But yeah, I'm gonna shut up now. Thank you for your time, and yeah.